From the surface, it looks like nothing. A small murky pool at the base of a cliff face in the South African wilderness. Green algae floating on top. Still water. Unremarkable in every way. But drop beneath that surface layer, beneath the algae, beneath the darkness, and the water turns crystal clear. And it keeps going. Down, and down, and down. Bushman's Hole is one of the deepest known freshwater cave systems on Earth. Its main chamber stretches nearly 300 meters into the ground, deep enough to swallow the Eiffel Tower hole and still have room above it. Only a handful of divers in the history of the sport have ever reached its floor. Several of them never came back. This is what happened inside Bushman's Hole. In August 1993, some of the world's finest cave divers assembled at Bushman's Hole for a single purpose: to break the record for the deepest cave dive ever made. Among them was a South African diver named Skjun, experienced with the local sinkholes and invited specifically for his expertise. But Boadi arrived with someone who had not been invited: his friend Eben Leiden. Uninvited divers at expeditions like this are a serious problem. These dives are tightly controlled. Every person, every tank, every piece of equipment accounted for in advance. Bringing an extra body introduces an unknown variable into a system designed to have none. But Boadi vouched for him. The concern was set aside, and Eben was allowed to dive. Before the main record attempt, Boadi and Eben descended together for an exploratory dive. The descent went smoothly through the tight entrance tunnel and into the vast chamber that opens up at around 60 meters. There's a check-in point just before that depth where divers pause and confirm everything is fine before going deeper. Both men signaled okay. They continued. Then at 60 meters, Boadi turned and realized Eben was not beside him. He looked into the darkness and saw Eben's flashlight sweeping frantically, the beam moving in desperate, searching arcs. What Boadi didn't know was that Eben had already completely drained his first air cylinder. In cave diving, there's a rule called the rule of thirds. 1/3 of your air going in, 1/3 coming out, 1/3 held in reserve for emergencies. Eben had violated it so severely that he needed his backup tank before they had even finished descending. But his backup regulator had slipped behind him during suiting up. It was pinned under his harness, completely inaccessible. Nobody had caught it in the pre-dive equipment check. Eben was out of air, trapped in a massive underwater cave, unable to reach his only remaining source of it. Instinct took over. He bolted upward, a fatal mistake in a cave environment where the exit is almost never directly above you. The ceiling in that chamber is vast and riddled with small openings that lead nowhere. A panicking diver searching blindly can search forever and never find the true exit. By the time Boadi reached him, Eben had stopped moving. Boadi could not simply ascend with him. At that depth, ascending too quickly causes decompression sickness, nitrogen bubbles forming in the bloodstream that can cripple or kill. He was required to make a series of timed stops on the way up. So Boadi held his position in the darkness, knowing his friend was dead, unable to do anything about it, waiting out each stop before he could surface. The team performed CPR for over 90 minutes. A doctor arrived and pronounced Eben dead. The world record attempt continued. Sheikh Exley descended to 263 meters, a new record. But Bushman's Hole had already taken its first life. It would not be the last. The year after Eben's death, a 20-year-old South African diver named Dion Dreyer received a phone call that changed everything. On the line was Nuno Gomes, one of the most elite deep water divers on Earth, assembling a support team for another record attempt at Bushman's Hole. Despite his age, Dion had logged over 200 hours of dive time. Nuno wanted him on the team, and when he asked, Dion said yes immediately. When Dion called his parents to share the news, his mother's reaction stopped him cold. She had never worried about his diving before. But something about this hole, this particular dive, made her beg him not to go. She pleaded repeatedly as the date approached. Dion reassured her and went anyway. December 17th, 1994. This was not the record attempt, just a practice dive. A chance for the support team to get familiar with the cave and each other before the real push. The descent went perfectly. The team reached their target depth, signaled OK, and began ascending. At 60 meters, everyone checked in. All fine. They continued upward. At 50 meters, one diver was missing. They looked down. A light was fading into the darkness below. Nuno looked at the diver beside him, who drew a slow finger across his throat. It was Dion, unconscious and sinking fast. By the time Nuno began chasing him, Dion was already 30 meters below. Nuno pushed deeper, until the point where continuing would have meant 2 divers lost instead of 1. He stopped. He watched the light disappear. Dion sank all the way to the bottom, nearly 300 meters down. What killed him was most likely hypercapnia, carbon dioxide poisoning. In extreme deep diving, CO2 can build silently in the bloodstream with almost no warning. You feel slightly off, then you feel nothing. By the time a diver notices something is wrong, the blackout is already happening. That evening, a police officer knocked on Dion's parents' door. His body remained at the bottom of Bushman's hole. At that depth, recovery was considered impossible. He would stay there, alone, in total darkness, nearly 300 meters below the surface for the next 10 years. Nuno Gomez was never going to let Bushman's hole beat him. Despite 2 failed attempts and serious decompression problems on both, he returned in 1996 with a full support team of 8 divers and a doctor, determined to break Sheikh Exley's world record once and for all. The descent began fast. Too fast. The bottom appeared far sooner than Nuno anticipated. He was sinking faster than he realized and had no time to inflate his buoyancy gear to slow down. He hit the floor of Bushman's hole on his hands and knees. The impact threw up a massive cloud of silt, instantly blinding him. He was stuck, physically embedded in the mud at the bottom of a 280-meter underwater cave. Unable to see, unable to move, dealing with nitrogen narcosis from the pressure and physical tremors caused by the helium in his breathing mix. Let that image settle. Alone, blind, stuck in mud, nearly 300 meters underwater, with a finite amount of air. Instead of panicking, Nuno went still, forced himself to pause, and inflated his buoyancy wings. The gentle lift pulled him free of the mud, raised him above the silt cloud, and gave him back his visibility and control. He completed the dive, reached a verified depth of 282.6 meters, shattering the record, and then spent 12 hours ascending through mandatory decompression stops. 14 minutes to reach the bottom. For minutes stuck in the mud. 12 hours to come back up. That is the reality of extreme deep cave diving. The descent is the easy part. Dave Shaw was an Australian living in Hong Kong who didn't start diving until his mid-40s. Within a few years, he had gone from recreational diver to shipwrecks to cave diving. And by the early 2000s, he was one of only 7 people on Earth to have successfully reached 250 meters or beyond. In 2004, Dave arrived at Bushman's hole to attempt a world record using a closed-circuit rebreather, a compact device that recycles exhaled gas, strips the carbon dioxide from it, and automatically maintains the correct oxygen level. No tank switching, no large external cylinders. It had never been taken to the kind of depth Dave was targeting. At around 270 meters, Dave touched the slope bottom and began moving toward the deepest point. As he was connecting a secondary rope to the main guideline, he glanced to his left. 50 feet away, lying on its back with arms extended upward, was a diver. Dave knew immediately. It was Dion, 10 years after the practice dive. 10 years at the bottom of Bushman's hole. Still there, Dave abandoned his record attempt on the spot. He swam over, tried to pull Dion up, but couldn't. A decade of sediment had covered his air tanks and buried him in the mud again. Dave tied a rope to Dion's tanks, marked the location, and began his ascent. He hadn't beaten the record, but he had found something everyone had assumed was impossible to find. 2 days later, Dave called Dion's parents. He told them he had found their son. He told them he was going to bring him home. Dion's parents broke down immediately, overwhelmed simultaneously by grief and a relief they had stopped believing they would ever feel. New Year's Day, 2005, Dave Shaw's wife drove him to the airport. She watched him leave carrying the custom body bag his team had made for the recovery. She would never see him again. The plan was meticulous. 7 support divers positioned at staggered depths throughout the cave, each ready to relay Dion's body upward in stages. Dave's closest friend and dive partner, Don Shirley, would wait at 220 meters, the deepest support position. Dave would descend alone to the bottom, free Dion, place him in the bag, and hand him a Don on the way up. Dave also agreed to wear a helmet camera for the documentary team. He normally kept his dive light on a cord around his neck, tucking it away when he needed both hands. The helmet made that impossible. He adjusted. He would simply set the light aside when needed. A small change. It would matter enormously. At 6:13 a.m., Dave slipped beneath the surface. 13 minutes later, Don began his descent toward 220 meters. At around 150 meters, Don could see Dave's light far below him, but it wasn't moving. By the dive plan's timing, Dave should already have been ascending. He wasn't. Then Don noticed something else. No air bubbles rising past him. In a cave dive, exhaled gas rises as a continuous stream of bubbles, a constant signal that the diver below is alive and breathing. There were none rising from below. Don descended past his assigned depth, past 220 meters, past 240 meters. At 244 meters, deeper than he had ever been, he heard a sharp crack. His rebreather controller had been crushed by the pressure. Without it, the device could no longer automatically manage his gas mix. He would have to manually monitor every breath for the entire 10-hour ascent. He had no choice but to turn back and hope Dave surfaced on his own. He didn't. The support divers at 150 meters saw no lights below them. A slate message was passed upward through the chain, hand to hand, depth to depth, until it reached Dave's closest friend Peter at 84 meters. Peter read 4 words written above Don's new decompression calculations. Dave not coming back. Don's ascent was its own nightmare. His vertigo worsened to the point of near blackout. He lost the guideline in the dark. He vomited repeatedly, pulling his regulator out, vomiting, replacing it over and over for hours. By the time he neared the surface, decompression sickness had set in hard. He was pulled up early, placed in a decompression chamber, and treated for 27 hours. The damage to his inner ear was permanent. He lives with constant vertigo to this day. Dion's parents had arrived at Bushman's hole that morning, wanting to be there when their son came home. The moment they heard Dave wasn't coming back, they left. They believed they would never see Dion again. They were wrong. 10 days after the dive, police divers found 2 bodies at 20 meters inside Bushman's hole. Dave Shaw, and attached to him by a rope, Dion Dreyer. Dave had brought him back after all. The helmet camera recorded everything. Peter, Don, and the documentary filmmaker watched the footage together in the days after Dave's death. It showed Dave reaching the bottom in 11 minutes, slightly faster than planned. He located Dion, swam to the body, and pulled out the recovery bag. When he reached Dion, a brief puff of silt obscured the camera. When it cleared, something nobody had anticipated had happened. Dion was floating. The forensics experts had predicted his body would be entirely skeletal after a decade at that depth. But beneath his dive suit, his body had partially mummified, retaining enough tissue to give him neutral buoyancy. Nobody had planned for this. Nobody had practiced for it. Dave began trying to work the body bag over Dion's fins. He struggled. His breathing rate climbed. In a rebreather, a rising breathing rate means more CO2 exhaled back into the system. The carbon dioxide was building in his bloodstream. Don watched the footage and found himself begging Dave out loud to stop, to just leave. Dave didn't stop. His thinking had narrowed to a single fixed point, a known symptom of nitrogen narcosis at extreme depth. The cognitive impairment it causes doesn't feel like confusion. It feels like absolute certainty. Dave was certain his only purpose was to get Dion to the surface. Everything else had ceased to exist. After more than 5 minutes, far longer than planned, Dave finally began to ascend. Then he stopped. His dive light was snagged on a rope. The helmet the documentary team had asked him to wear had prevented him from carrying the light the way he always had. He reached for his shears. He didn't cut the rope. His movements began to slow. 22 minutes after reaching the bottom of Bushman's hole, Dave Shaw lost consciousness. He drowned at 270 meters. But the rope he had tied to Dion on his previous dive, and the buoyancy of Dion's mummified body, had done what the plan couldn't. Dion floated upward, pulling Dave with him, until both came to rest at 20 meters where they were found days later. Dion's parents held their son's remains 10 days after the recovery. Dave Shaw went into Bushman's hole to bring a stranger's son home. He did, and it cost him everything.